What's going on, YouTube? Hey, thanks for tuning in. Joe Miller here from First Detachment. We really excited about our guest today, Jon Heck from North Carolina, the strength and conditioning coach for the football team there. So really excited to have him on. Good friends with Mr. Justin Harris, which many of you probably know. That's why you're tuning in. And then as this program or these shows continue to grow, you'll learn to know him. It's interesting fellow, but he's not able to be with us tonight. But really looking forward to having Jon on. Thanks, Jon, for taking the time. We'll kind of walk through a few things there. But before we do all that and have all that fun stuff, I have to get my disclaimers in. Otherwise, Justin might get grumpy. So we got to make sure we do the whole the pointing thing that everyone does on YouTube about the comments, right? Got to do the subscribe thing and the notifications and the like and all that fun stuff. But in all seriousness, the more feedback you guys share, put your questions in there. You subscribe, we can track that stuff. We know what topics you want to see. We have tons of guests from people like Jon, who are strength and conditioning experts, to professional athletes across multiple disciplines, to dietitians, to general health practitioners. We just have a list of great guests lined up, Jon being one of them. So, Jon, welcome to the show. Appreciate you coming on, and looking forward to unpacking some fun stuff with you today.
Absolutely. I'm psyched to be on.
Yeah, and I will say I'm a little bit, some of this is going to be for our viewers, some of it is just going to be for me. So hopefully they don't mind. But I coach some big time football myself, so we do have something in common. I do coach 8th grade football. We're pretty hardcore. Proud to say we only gave up 12 points. My first team, my starters did in 6 games, and I was a defensive coordinator. So we're pretty big time. We're almost to the level of North Carolina, right?
12 points cool. In 6 games total. That's dominant. So under the higher year over here at UNC.
Yeah, so man, that is what a great accomplishment for you. You're younger guy, and big time college football strength coach. Walk me through just, if we can take it just kind of from early stages when you first got into strength training, like what drew you to it, and then man, how'd you turn into this awesome career? I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, for sure. So I grew up in a football household. My dad played in the NFL. He's currently coaching in the NFL. My brother plays in the NFL right now for the Houston Texans. So very much a football household, out of the womb. And then, as I started getting older, I'd start going to the stadium with my dad, going to practices. And I started gravitating towards the weight room every time I'd go. I was just always interested what the guys were doing when they're lifting. And that was kind of my first, where that seed got planted. And then as I got older and older, I really became, interested in training, and that led to an interest in nutrition. And then, suddenly I'm trying to get my hands on any book I can, exercise, physiology, just lifting handbooks, whatever. And as I started becoming a football player myself, strength training is a huge part of football. And I started lifting in 7th grade, and pretty much as soon as I touched a barbell, I was completely in love with it.
That's awesome.
And, my football career developed. I ended up getting a scholarship to the University of North Carolina, and, continued to develop my love of training, nutrition. I majored in exercise sports science. And over time, as my football career went on, what I realized was my passion truly was the training. When our off season lifting and conditioning, in my mind, that basically became my in season. That was my favorite time of the year. And I started to lose my passion a little bit for playing football itself. I was someone who didn't necessarily have just a natural love for it. When you're born in a football household, when you're as big as I was, you kind of naturally just go into it. And I was good at it. And, I was climbing the ranks. And it wasn't until I got older, until I was going into my senior year of college, that I kind of realized, man, this really is not my passion.
Mm-hmm.
Training, nutrition, that is truly my passion. So, early on in high school, I knew I wanted to be a strength and conditioning coach when I got done playing. And, like I said, going into my senior year, I kind of just had that epiphany of, I don't know if I want to continue playing football after this. So I made the decision at the beginning of my senior year that when the season was done, that I was done playing. And I had an opportunity to go to the next level, turn down combine invite, Senior Bowl invite, to didn't do pro day or anything like that. I was just as soon as we played our bowl game, that was it. And started applying to internships. Started looking for my first powerlifting meet. I was just ready to do something that I truly loved for the first time. So I started off just working at a local training facility called D1 Sports Training here in Raleigh, and then I landed a job with the Carolina Panthers on their strength and conditioning staff, working for Joe Ken, who's a legendary strength coach, legendary football strength coach, kind of one of the OGs in the field. Excuse me. And he became my biggest mentor in strength and conditioning. Um, and then from there, a job opened up at my alma mater back at UNC on their strength and conditioning staff. So I went down, interviewed, and got the job. And now I'm going on my fifth season with UNC.
Nice.
And then personally, I compete in strongman. I started off competing in powerlifting. You know, the competitive fire that I had for football, you know, I really put that into powerlifting, put that into strongman, and you know, so training and nutrition is still something uh, near and dear to my heart personally, and then obviously within my career.
Nice. Yeah, I have to ask because you said something earlier about you're trying to grab like every book you can get your hands on. What was like one of your first books that you remember? Is there any classics that stick out to you for strength training?
Louis Simmons, the West Side Book of Methods.
Okay,
My
nice.
first real exposure to you know, true training literature, at least at an age where I was understanding what I was reading, was the West Side Book of Methods.
That's awesome. Yeah, I thought about and then I looked in my camera here and I'm like, oh, I still do have it. So right here, this yellow book is my first one. The Encyclopedia of Modern Bodybuilding by Arnold
Yeah,
Schwarzenegger. I think
yeah,
every guy in the kid in the 80s had that. Like that was like my first ever, you know, is this your nothing similar to strength and conditioning or Louis Simmons type style. It was
yeah.
all your basic stuff. But yeah, I
I
think my
can't
older
remember
brother
the
got it.
title of the book, but I had one similar where it was just all the various exercises out there with a picture of a guy, you know,
Yep.
demonstrating it. And I was in seventh grade when I just started. I'm looking at this book, and this guy has 135 on the bar for all these lifts. I was like, oh my God, this guy's strong as hell. Like, guy's just benching 135, squatting 135. That's when thought I was a big man, putting 25s on the bar
Nice.
on bench. But needless to say, I got a lot stronger after that.
Yeah, that's awesome. Now you said you started football in seventh grade. You're a bigger guy, come from a big you know, bunch of big fellas in your family. I'm just curious around that seventh grade when you started, how big were you?
Seventh grade, I was probably about 6'3", but I was skinny. I did not fill out until I was about a sophomore in high school. So I was seventh grade, probably 6'3", 160,
Okay.
something like
And
that.
where'd you graduate at? I mean, obviously you're getting recruited, it sounds like, and what size were you when you graduated?
By my senior year of high school, I was 6'7", 280.
Yeah. So you grew a little bit.
Yeah, a little bit.
Just a little bit.
Um, yeah, so as soon as I stopped growing vertically, then I filled out, and that's when all the
Yeah.
weight started piling on. That's when I really kind of clicked athletically.
Good stuff. Well, I want to get into in a minute, get into like the powerlifting and strongman. But before we do, I think just in case there are some athletes out there or people kind of in my stage of life that might have some kids coming up in the ranks, just curious if you could talk a little bit about like with your dad being in the NFL and your brother, what was the recruitment process like for you? You know, how did that kind of pan out? When, you know, can you walk us through a little bit of that towards the end of your high school years?
Yeah, well, I mean, it starts you start getting some letters in the mail, you know, like questionnaires from schools, and suddenly you start getting a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more mail, and then you're getting handwritten letters. And then I went to a powerhouse high school in Florida, so every time we had our spring practices, there would always be college coaches, college scouts there watching. So, you know, I quickly, you know, when I was a sophomore in high school, I was 6'6", you know, 250, whatever I was at the
Yeah.
time. So I was a big kid. And so I stood out. And then, you know, the coaches started talking to me, and then started taking some unofficial visits to schools, you know, when there was interest. And then I got my first scholarship offer from the University of Virginia. at the end of my sophomore year, going into my junior year. And then after that first scholarship offer, then you're really kind of on the radar, and that's when they all start kind of
Start
pouring
coming
in.
in.
So, after that, you've got a stack of mail from colleges every week. And no, I was a 3-star recruit. I wasn't, a blue chip 5-star that was offered by every school in the nation. I was offered by most of the ACC schools. And, then from there, started taking official visits to schools and really just started trying to decide where I wanted to go.
Yeah. And just curious, is your brother who's in the NFL, is he older or younger?
He's younger.
Okay, younger. So were you the first child in your family to kind of go
I
through this
was. I
process?
was oldest of four, and
Got it.
Charlie, my younger brother's a triplet,
Got
actually.
it. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. That's interesting. So, just kind of for some of those viewers out there, just listening to that process, like I'm curious to how did what role did your parents play in that? Were they really hands on? Were they kind of, hey, whatever you want to do? Like, what was that process like?
So I was fortunate to have a dad who went through it all himself. He was a huge recruit in high school. He was the captain of the Notre Dame 1988 national championship, first round draft pick, played 12 years in the league. So, I think a lot of those parents out there that kind of live vicariously through their kids and are way hands on and trying to be a coach,
Right.
those tend to be parents who didn't go through it themselves. So my dad did. He knew what the process was like. He knew the pressure. He knew everything that I was going to be experiencing. So um, I don't want to say he was hands off. He was always there,
Right.
providing his wisdom, but he was not someone who was trying to insert himself into the process, trying to tell me where he thinks I should go, or
Yeah.
he was not a. I always say this. He was a dad first to me and a coach
Right.
second.
Yeah.
Some parents have that backwards,
Right.
unfortunately. So no, he was always just a voice of reason for me. He always wanted me to do what I wanted to do. And he's always been supportive of everything I've ever done, including quitting football. Well, retiring from football after college ended.
Sure. Yeah. No, I appreciate you sharing that. And I would imagine you get to interact now with kids and their parents on visits and things. Is that something that you're kind of involved in that process too, or?
Yep, in college, recruiting is a huge part of it. So in
Yep.
the off season, we're in the weight room. We're constantly hosting recruits. They'll do their tour throughout the whole facility, and then one of their stops is the weight room. So we'll give them our staff. We give them a full presentation, talk about our program, run through all the equipment, the facility, etc. So yeah, we deal with the recruits and their parents all the
Sure. Well, and that's the kind of the last thing about football, and we'll get into the real stuff you're passionate about. Well, I know you're passionate about football too, but the training we'll get into. But what was it that made you just decide? You had some options, and what led you to North Carolina? What was kind of the deciding factor?
So it came down to UVA, University of Virginia, and UNC for me. My dad had coached at UVA. We had lived in Charlottesville, Virginia, so I knew the area. I loved the school, um, and I wanted to go into pre med, and UVA was a fantastic academic institution. So I figured I was going to go to UVA. I had no affiliation with UNC, knew very little about them. But when they started recruiting me, they're a bordering state. So when we'd visit UVA, we also started visiting UNC, and UNC was similar in terms of the academics they had there. And then I just fell in love with it
Yeah,
when I started visiting. Just something about the school, something about the guys on the team, just felt right. So that's what I went with.
awesome. Yeah, so all in, it sounds like you've been there about 9, 10 years now, right?
Yeah, I graduated in 2016,
Got it.
and let's see, I committed to UNC in 2011.
Okay. So now as we kind of transition over to what your current like training, then we'll kind of get into the strength coaching things. But so you did some powerlifting. Can you kind of walk us through what you did? And of course everyone out there is gonna want to know totals. But
Yeah,
no, just a
so
little more like what you did, where you competed and how that experience was for you.
yeah, so I started off in powerlifting. I was a fan of the sport as a football player. You know, watching Mark Bell and his YouTube channel and listening to his podcast and being fans of, Stan Efferding, Dan Green, a lot of
Yeah.
those powerlifters who were big in the 2010s. Um, I knew I wanted to go into powerlifting, and I did. And I'm 6'7". I'm not necessarily the the stereotypical build of a powerlifter. Um, I did my first powerlifting meet shortly after I graduated. Um, Absolutely fell in love with it. I've actually only done two powerlifting meets. The last one I did was back in 2017. So my current existing total is absolutely nothing to be impressed by. Because right after that, I transitioned into strongman because when I took the job back at UNC, um, there's an amazing strongman gym here in Raleigh called
Nice.
Spider Strength. And the reason I didn't get into strongman in the first place was just, I mean, very few gyms have strongman equipment. You don't
Right.
find many places that have logs, Atlas stones, all that stuff. And I knew I needed someone to teach me how to do it all. So when we moved here and I heard about this strongman gym and saw some of the freaks that were training there, and it's owned by a former America's Strongest Man, um, a really good competitor himself. I went, checked it out, met the guys, jumped into a training session, and I was hooked.
Yeah.
I'm much more built for it. Um, so I fell in love with strongman and started competing. And right as I was getting ready to go for my pro card, the whole world shut down with COVID.
Oh,
So all the competitions were canceled, um, and I have yet to compete since then because during the whole pandemic process, I sustained a pretty severe disc injury, resulting in severe nerve impingement, and I basically lost function in my right leg. So for almost a year there, I was basically dragging this right leg around. Um, a non-functional calf, semi-functional hamstring and glute, and it was an incredibly frustrating process. I thought that was the end for me as far as a competitor myself. Um, but 2.5 years of rehab later, I've finally nursed this thing back to health, got a ton of nerve function back, and I've finally surpassed all my pre-injury strength. So
nice.
gearing up to compete again here at the end of January, which will qualify me for nationals. Then I just got to go and take care of business there and get that pro card.
Nice. So yeah, one of the things I'm sure a lot of people don't know, and I know a little bit about it. I, was a state level strongman competitor here, did it for about a year. So by no means anywhere near your level. So I have a general understanding. I was really fortunate. Some guys that were competing at a pretty high level kind of helped put together a program for me. So I'm just curious, and I'm sure people out there are too. Can you walk us through like what a week looks like, and then maybe like a training block, if like, for this many weeks we usually generally do this. I mean, I know there's a lot of customization there, but can you kind of just give a brief, like an overview of that?
Yeah. So the interesting thing about strongman compared to powerlifting is every strongman competition, the events are going to be different.
Yep.
Typically, there's going to be 5 events, and every competition is going to be a different combination of 5 events. And there's a million different variations of every event. I mean, sometimes you'll be lifting max weight for a single. Sometimes it's max reps in 60 seconds. There's moving events. There's a million different deadlift variations you might have to do. So setting up training for strongman is always going to be based around what are the 5 events, and there's going to be certain competitions that lean much more towards pure static strength. A lot of max weight type events, and the training for that is going to look different than certain competitions which lean more towards max rep type events or a lot of moving events. So depending on if it's a heavier competition or a lighter competition will really kind of dictate what training looks like there. My biggest thing for strongman is you have to be well rounded. You've got to be a generally strong human. You've got to be in good shape. You've got to have excellent work capacity, and you can't have a weakness in strongman. In powerlifting, you've got your squat specialists, your bench specialists, your deadlift specialists. and they only have three things they need to focus on. They need to be good at squatting, benching, deadlifting. They just have to do it for a single on meet day.
Right.
Strongman, you got to be able to do it all. So there's always going to be, I'm always going to be focusing on a foundation of GPP. Just general work capacity, conditioning is going to be huge for strongman competitors. Developing an overhead press, developing deadlift. Both of those are going to be huge. I tend not to do a whole lot of back squatting with strongman competitors. I'll typically lean on a front squat.
Does that kind of help with the? Does that help that movement help more with like things like the Atlas Stone and some of the other?
So much of strongman is anteriorly loaded. So whether it's an Atlas Stone out in front, whether it's a log that's out in front, whether it's a sandbag carry, a Zercher, whatever, so much of strongman is anterior load. So front squat has a ton of transfer. And then the other thing, just about every strongman event is going to be incredibly taxing on your lower back.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at setting up your training, a lot of your training is going to have to be lower back taxing. You don't want to add on other things that are additionally lower back taxing, like a back squat, for example. So when you're setting up your training, you really have to look at the 5 events and say, okay, how can I train all 5 of these events while not destroying my body, right? So a lot of times I'll kind of have an A week and a B week where I'll train certain events heavy and the other events light, and then the next week I flip it. The other events I train heavy, the other events I train light. If it's a moving event, for example, on one week I'll do heavy load, short distance. On the following week, lightweight, longer distances, or lighter weight, really focusing on foot speed. Typically every session I'll have one or two of the events that I'm touching on in the session, and then complementary barbell exercises. So, if it's a session where I'm doing Atlas stones, I'm probably going to be front squatting in that session. The front squat is going to be a complementary lift for an Atlas stone. It's going to prime me up for the Atlas stone, working with similar muscle groups. So whatever event I'm touching on that day, I'm going to choose a few main, traditional lifts to go with it that are going to help strengthen that movement. Typically with the event work, you're not necessarily building strength when you're doing the event work itself. The event work is really practice more than anything. It's more the barbell lifts, the accessory work that you're building that general strength to transfer over to the events themselves. So,
would you? And would you still do like the traditional movements, say on a day, and then also do Atlas Stone at the end of it? Like finish the training with the implement.
Yeah. So usually I'll do the at least some of the barbell work first. I like doing some of the event work when I'm already a little bit pre-fatigued, because on competition day, outside of event number 1, all 4 of the other events, you're going to be somewhat fatigued for them. So I like being A, warmed up from the barbell lifting, and then B, forced to train in a little bit of a state of fatigue when I'm touching on the event work.
Got it. Yeah, just to show everybody out there, just kind of here's this an image. I was typing for a minute while you were talking. I was trying to find some good images of you, but I failed miserably. So just a couple images of kind of Atlas Stone, and we was talking about that anterior load and just kind of that beginning phase of lifting it, and just kind of that partial phase. It brings back memories. But
yeah,
great,
a lot of
movement.
these strongman events, they look kind of awkward, barbaric, like there's not a whole lot of technique involved, like you just pick up the heavy rock. But when I first got into the sport, I was shocked at how much technique goes to each and every event. I was a fantastic deadlifter, so I thought, oh, picking up the Atlas stones, that's gonna be my thing. The second I touched an Atlas stone, I was like, oh my God, this is something totally
You're
different.
absolutely right, because like I remember the positioning, and then use the tacky in your hands and your forearms, like how you get them just right on the rock or the stone, determine like some of the larger ones I could do down the road. I would do easier than the lighter ones. because my technique, just my brain must have kicked in like, okay, this is hard. Like we need to get the right leverage. And as you're mentioning, like that slow roll back to get it in between your legs and then kind of
Yeah.
shimmy it up, it's,
And
yeah,
those,
it's,
the wider diameter stones, you get more surface area to kind of bear hug it.
yep.
So the smaller stones are a huge pain in the ass to lift
Yeah.
because you're awkwardly trying to, hug it. But the wider the surface area, you get a little better grip on it, but obviously heavier.
So now you mentioned this, so there's generally 5 events that you're training for. It sounds like, is that like a 5 day a week rotation? Do you go every other day? Is it 5 days straight? Like, what does that look like for you?
So I've done it multiple different ways, and I hate to keep giving borderline non-answers,
No,
the
no,
old
this good.
depends answer. But if it's depending on how heavy the competition is, how lower back taxing it is, I mean, I've trained as little as 3 days a week for it because that's literally all I could recover from. And then I've trained up to 5 days a week. If there's an event that is not overly taxing, but also has a high level of skill demand, like a circus dumbbell, for example,
Right.
um, that's something that I'll train twice a week
Got
just to
it.
continue to get the practice. It's not incurring too much of a recovery deficit. So if it's a lighter competition, more of a rep or moving based competition, or there's just an event where I really need to continue to hammer the skill, I'll train more frequently. If it's just a brutal, heavy, max overhead press, max deadlift, heavy yoke type competition, I might be looking at training 3 days a week. Um, and just step number one, look at the events, say, how can I train these while still mitigating fatigue and allowing myself to recover? And looking at training frequency is one of those first steps.
And now, so that for the meets, I know in the past or the events, the competitions, all 5. I know one of the ones I went to, I think they only told us 4 or 3 or something, but again, it was a smaller contest. Do you always know which events you're going to do?
Typically, they release the events and the weights a few months in advance.
Yeah.
For sometimes there's a mystery event type
Right.
thing. With some of the bigger, world's strongest man type competitions, they'll keep a lot of those events under wraps until right at the very end of things. But for the most part, at the amateur level, they release all the events a few months in advance, so you can prepare.
Got it. Yeah, and it seems to me too like there's a really good dynamic. People think just big, strong guys, but like the conditioning as well as the strength. Because when I was doing it, a friend of mine, competed at a fairly high level. He won a couple states and did well at nationals. Not the level you were at, but or are at, but he was up there. And a big thing that he used to say separated him is they were all just as strong. Maybe some guys even a little stronger than him, but he has had great conditioning to where he would, he could just, if it was any of the carrying events or the sprint in between and grab the wagon, and then you got to pull the chain and do the, any of those type of relay type events, he just always just crushed it. He would win those all the time. And, it's interesting. So is there anything you do for cardio? Or is it just kind of, using the implements, like interval style? How do you work on your, endurance or ability to kind of last through those longer,
Yeah, so
events?
most of my conditioning work is done within training, and I like using some strongman implements for my conditioning, whether that a lot of what I do will be either some sort of a carry, whether that's a sandbag carry or a yoke carry, and I'm doing runs, every minute on the minute. For example, it might be sandbag carry for a set distance, set it down, start the clock, and then you're starting rep number 2 right when you hit 60 seconds and doing, 15 rounds of that. Um, if it's a max reps in 60-second event that I'm prepared for, um, we'll have a set weight that gets released. For example, if it's a log clean and press, max reps in 60 seconds, it'll be a set weight for every competitor, and that weight is released. So it might be, 300 pounds. So I'll start the training cycle, with lighter weight, really trying to hit significantly more reps than I'm probably going to at that 300-pound weight in competition, just building that base of conditioning specific to that event, and tapering that down a little bit as I get closer and closer. but most of the conditioning work is handled within training, strongman style.
Got it. Yeah, and just kind of showing us a little bit, just showing a few different positions here for people who maybe haven't, just trying to, as far as like the log that you're talking about, right?
Yep,
Is this pretty familiar to kind of some of the
that's it.
movements? Yep. And usually, and if I remember correctly, and it's a mixture, right, of like total weight, and then some events will be reps. I know one I did was reps. Is that kind of like, hey, here's the weight, and how many reps can you get?
Yep, exactly.
So yeah, it's interesting, interesting stuff. Um, no, good stuff. I appreciate that. I do, so we talked a lot about training, a couple other components there. I know one of the things that I struggled with, and I can imagine it's tenfold at your level, was injury. From just kind of not doing the maintenance work. So, and then the second thing was just caloric intake and nutrition. So I know, we were talking before, you worked with Justin Harris from Tripona Nutrition and First Detachment. He did, that's kind of how you and I met.
Yep.
Um, he worked a little bit with nutrition. Obviously, you have a ton of knowledge on the topic as well. So curious to, like, what is your overview, as far as nutrition goes currently for your training specifically? What does that look like? Pre, post, during workout, throughout the week? Just kind of give us an overview of that.
Yeah, so I view the nutrition for strongman and powerlifting equally, if not more important than the training. I mean, you look at the elite strongman competitors, 350 to 450 pounds body weight
Yeah.
on average, and that's a lot of muscle those guys are carrying.
Right.
Some, they're not in bodybuilding shape by any means, but those guys are carrying a ton of muscle. And I quickly realized early in my career how important the nutrition was for physically developing to where I needed to be to have any shot of being competitive. And I kind of stumbled into it a little bit by accident. Um, when I first got into powerlifting, I just did the classic dirty bulk, gained 50 pounds over the course of a few months, went from about 310 up to 360, and saw some great gains initially. Bench went up, squat went up, got to a point where I literally couldn't deadlift from the floor because my midsection had gotten so big. And but
That's when
then
that's when you go sumo, though, right?
yeah, I did. Literally, that's what I did. Um, but I quickly got to a point where progress in training halted and started declining. I felt awful, absolutely no conditioning. Health was taking a turn for the worse. Just constantly in a state of misery. Um, so at that point, I dieted myself down. I was decently well versed on nutrition, was doing all the research that I could, and I dieted myself down, probably way over dieted. I got down to 270, 275. So
Wow.
lost a ton of strength in the process, but I got leaner than I'd ever been before. I had abs for the first time in my life, and I really kind of fell in love with the process of just, eating 6 meals a day, prepping, seeing daily, weekly physique changes, and seeing vascularity starting to form. And I kind of fell in love with the process. And then, after I finished dieting, I really stayed locked in on nutrition, got my calories back up, and then suddenly all my strength started coming back. My body kind of got used to its new leverages. And next thing I knew, after a few months, I had regained all the strength that I lost, and I was equally as strong as I was at 360. But now I was about 285 pounds with abs
Yeah.
and had that same strength, but it was in exponentially better shape, way better condition. Had great motivation and energy and training. I was light on my feet. So I quickly realized, okay, being strong is not just about eating everything in sight and getting as big as possible. There's a lot to this when it comes to just developing a physique. I mean, I started looking at the bodybuilders, and everyone thinks the bodybuilders are soft with training, or the Smith machine, this and that. But you look at these bodybuilders, they are incredibly strong. whether it was Ronnie and Dorian Yates or just, some of the guys today, Nick Walker, Ian Valier, guys like that. I mean, these guys are moving incredible weight with incredible control for sets of 8, 10, 12, 15. Um, and muscle mass is what moves weight.
Right.
So I quickly realized how important the nutrition was. And, eventually I realized that I want to work with a coach and I want to work with a bodybuilding coach. It's the bodybuilders who know how to develop a physique, know how to put muscle on humans better than anyone else in this field. Um, and I'd been a fan of Justin Harris for a few years actually, just seeing YouTube videos of him when he was, working with Dave Tate and was doing writing a lot of articles for Elite FTS. So,
Yeah.
I was well aware of Justin years before I ever reached out to him. Um, but I got to a certain point where I'd gotten big again, much leaner, but I was big. I just competed in the strongman competition. I was back up to about 340, 350, and I knew it was time to diet again. I was like, I want to work with a coach this time. So I reached out to Justin. Um, he took me on, and that's when I really kind of started learning about how to weaponize nutrition and apply it to strength athletes. Justin dieted me down. We did it right. We dieted slow and patient. Um, and then from there, at the end of the diet, we rebounded. I put on more muscle mass than I'd ever put on in any one given period of time in my life. Suddenly, my numbers in the gym were just skyrocketing. I was hitting lifetime PRs across the board. And short after that, that's when I was really knocking on the door of my pro card.
Yeah.
Um, so I see, like I said, nutrition is being equally, if not more important than the training itself. If you want to be a strength athlete, you've got to put muscle on. And, I see a lot of lifters out there who go through these quote unquote hypertrophy blocks because they do sets of 8 for a few weeks. Like, no, if you want to really be serious about hypertrophy, you got to eat like a bodybuilder, you know.
Right.
And, so
Well, I want
now,
if I c sorry, I was gonna jump in on that just before we get too far away from the process. Just for
sure.
those who might maybe don't know out there, can you walk through, like, how long when you're working with Justin, how long did you diet down for? Like, how long was that, uh, process?
We probably dieted down for about 16 weeks. I would say
Yeah.
was the
So
duration.
4 months, and I
Yeah.
think a lot of people sometimes think of a diet, especially if they're not in like a physique sport, they think of a diet as like a month or 45 days, right? So
Yeah.
16 weeks, as you mentioned, like a slow progression. Like if you've seen how big a pound or those like models of 5 pounds of fat, like imagine if you only lost a pound of fat a week for 16 weeks, like that's 3 of those massive things off your body. So 16 weeks. And then, the rebound, for those who don't know, it's really a time when your body is like so depleted and just starved for nutrients that it's going to really just absorb much, much more than it ever would at any other time in your training. So it's a big reason why you see bodybuilders, if they do 3, 4, 5 shows, like you'll see them just massively bigger and put on a bunch of stage weight over that 5 years because they get 4 or 5 rebounds. And so there's tons of content on the channel about that process. But uh, if you could talk a little bit about like how long was that kind of rebound phase, and as you came out of it, like what was the strategy there?
Yeah. So we dieted down for about 16 weeks. And then entering the rebound phase, calories started going back up. And that probably lasted about 6 weeks. And I gained a substantial amount of weight during that time. I think I probably gained 20 plus pounds during the rebound. And, looking in the mirror, it looks like I only got leaner, because
Yeah.
your muscles fill back out with all the glycogen, all the water. At the end of a diet, you're a little bit deflated,
Right.
and you spend those 6 weeks just your body is like a sponge, just soaking up nutrients. You're training hard, you're feeling amazing in the gym, you've got your energy back, you're in a
Yeah.
calorie surplus, and quickly gained a ton of weight back, good weight. Um, quickly gained a ton of strength back, and then after those 6 weeks or so, then it's kind of going into the typical bodybuilder off season,
Right.
where we're not necessarily focused on a consolidated period of growth, but we're in a calorie calorie surplus, I'm eating a lot of food, training hard for, several months. And, as a strongman competitor, my year as a whole looks a little bit different than a bodybuilder. Like you mentioned, bodybuilder will do multiple shows throughout the year, multiple rebounds, multiple diets. As a strongman competitor, I don't quite have that luxury. I've got to have a longer quote unquote off season in
Right.
terms of bodybuilding dieting. I've got to get myself a little bit bigger than I probably would if I was a competitive bodybuilder. Um, and then obviously, that period of time is when I'm competing in strongman. Um, but ever since then, it's now been my philosophy that at least once a year, every year, I'm going to diet myself down like a bodybuilder. I'm going to
Yeah.
diet down and I'm going to rebound. And that's what I advocate for any competitor is whether you're a powerlifter or you're a strongman, when you're done competing, when you're going into your off season, focus on your physique, like get lean. There are so many benefits that you will reap, especially for the bigger guys, especially
Yeah.
for the super heavyweights. Um, Dieting down in your off season it is going to set you up for the best period of growth in your life. And that's when nutrition became hugely important for me. That's when things really took off for me, as a
Yeah.
lifter.
Well, and I think one of the things too that I'm sure this is the case with you is, the size of the person you're working with is going to determine these numbers, but generally, if it's anywhere from a 250 up to 750 to 1,000 calories more, you know, per week, maybe a little more than that in a guy your size. But I think it's important to work with someone in the off season or at least have check-ins periodically so that you don't kind of perma bulk or get to that, oh, I put on extra 5 or 6% body fat because I was ramping up. And I know we've all been there. I know I've been there to where I'm adding maybe too many calories too fast, where it's like, you start to kind of grow and you're like, this is great, more is better. And then there's a point where that scale tips, but you could wake up 6 months from now and be eating way more food than you did during your rebound and be like, oh my gosh, like I'm struggling to keep my weight up because you kind of grew. The saying is like growing into the diet, where I think a lot of people it's like you have to be patient, but being patient actually helps you get where you want to go faster, which is counterintuitive for a lot of people.
Yeah, and when you're dieting, when we're in the fat loss phase, it seems like there tends to be a little bit of a higher degree of focus on the nutrition. Number one, you're hungry, so you're thinking about every meal. And when I'm dieting, I'm like hyper focused on. I'm always prepping. I'm always thinking about my next meal. I'm seeing the visual progress in the mirror. But to your point, you get into that off season mode, that same level of focus is hard to maintain.
Mhm.
Suddenly things have shifted. Now we're eating a lot of food. Now it's like, all right, it's time to gain weight. And it's very easy to get into that much more lackadaisical mindset. And then, the deeper you get into that off season, you're not as hungry anymore. And suddenly that bowl of rice doesn't look nearly as appetizing, as that bowl of cinnamon toast crunch.
Right.
And so to your point, for me, it's almost more important to work with a coach in an off-season phase when I'm growing, to keep me accountable, like you said, to make sure I'm A, eating enough, B, not eating too much, and then it's gonna keep me in the pocket in terms of what I'm eating.
Yeah. No, that's a good point. That's a good point. Well, what I wanted to do, a lot of great insights there, I think, for everybody tuning in. I want to transition for a little bit and talk about, your style. Obviously, you're extremely well educated from, the work you've done, but also your formal education and around strength conditioning programs. You've been doing it for quite a while at a big time, football program. Just kind of curious if you can give like an overview. What is your approach as a coach in strength conditioning? Call it, if we can maybe give a high level. I know there's a lot of detail in this, but maybe an overview as far as in season versus off season training for your football team without giving away too many secrets to the
Yeah,
rivals, of course.
absolutely. Um, so if you were to walk in our weight room at any given time during a lift, you would see multiple different programs happening. So we have a 5-man staff. Each person on our staff kind of has their different specialty, their different niche. their group that they're going to work with. So typically our team is going to be divided into there's the base team program. That's the guys who are playing a lot, the guys who travel. And that's going to be divided up into our big man position groups, our linemen, our tight ends, our linebackers, and our skill position groups, receivers, running backs, DBs. And the big men are going to train differently than the skill guys. And then we've got a completely different quarterback program. Then we've got a freshman program. Then we've got a developmental program, which is for some of the older guys who aren't playing as much.
Hmm.
So we're able to push them a little bit harder. And then we've got a whole group of guys who are modified, whether it's recovering from an injury, or they just need some sort of special accommodation. We have a ton of different programs going, and for as far as philosophy for football strength and conditioning, we've got to be very diverse. We can't be set in our ways. You know, um, Really, it comes down to defining what is the goal, what is the purpose of the training should reflect that. And then as far as what the specifics of that will look like are going to depend on the individual. Because on our football team, we have about 110 guys and we've got multiple different position groups. The physical demands of the different position groups are different than each other. Within the position groups, we've got guys who are built vastly different than each other. So we're not having all of our guys do the same thing. There's certain guys in our program who are not going to squat because they're not built for it. They're the tall, extremely long-legged basketball type receivers. So the name of the game for us is you know it's kind of an art figuring out, okay, what does this type of guy need versus that type of guy. And but as far as in season, off season, obviously right now we're in season for our main team guys, the guys who are playing. Um, it's very low volume. They're training. They train with us 3 days a week. So on Wednesdays they'll do their lower body lift. They'll squat. On Thursdays they'll do upper body and they'll bench. And then on Sundays, the day after the game, we're getting kind of a total body, you know, dumbbell work, some bodybuilding type work, some correctives. But volume is very low in season for those guys. We'll rotate. We'll do 2 weeks of strength work where we're touching on some heavier weights, and then we'll rotate to 2 weeks of speed and dynamic effort work. So
Mhm.
that's how we periodize it throughout the season. 2 weeks heavy, 2 weeks dynamic effort, 2 weeks heavy, 2 weeks dynamic effort. That way we're maintaining the strength that we built in the off season by touching
Yeah.
on heavy weights periodically through the season. And then we're keeping the guys explosive. We're keeping the guys primed by having those speed weeks in there. So we'll do a dynamic effort squat. We'll do a dynamic effort bench press. And then, a lot of programs will traditionally do some sort of Olympic lift, like a power clean. We don't do that in our program. We've gotten away from that. That's kind of a conversation in and of itself. But we
Yeah,
do
I've
a,
heard
a
that.
trap bar. We do a
I was
trap bar jump shrug.
sorry, I was gonna go ahead. I was just gonna
Um,
mention I've heard that there's like some that are like really for the Olympic lifts or cleaning, and then some strength programs that are against it. Is it a higher risk of injury you found? Is there? I know it's a probably a whole episode in itself, but are there any like key bullet points of kind of why you'd steer against it?
yeah, so I mean, power cleans. That's the most common Olympic variation you'll see in football programs. It's kind of been just a stereotypical traditional lift in strength and conditioning for football, which it's a training explosive triple extension. It makes sense. But the thing is, a clean is a sport in and of itself. The technique demand to actually reap the benefit of a
Yeah,
clean where you're actually fully explosively triple extending, it takes a lot of work just to teach that. And when we've got 110 guys trying to get everyone doing a complex movement truly correctly, like a power clean, we are wasting so much time and energy and effort just teaching it and then troubleshooting errors and correcting technique. When we get our freshmen in, we were spending so many weeks just teaching the power clean from square one, building it all the way up, and still we'll have guys who are just not built well for it, who just can't quite get it. So we opted towards, hey, let's train. These guys are not Olympic lifters. They don't need to be good at cleans. They need to be explosive.
Right.
So we opted for finding a solution that was going to have a much lower learning curve to where the guys do not have to spend years learning how to do the thing. They can just quickly learn and get right into training. So we do a trap bar jump shrug. So we will set up a trap bar elevated slightly off the floor on crash pads, and the guys will basically just explosively jump at the top, shrug, kind of similar to how pulling the bar on a clean.
Yeah.
And very easy technique wise, we'll put a bar accelerometer on it. So there's Tendo units out there. We use a perch system, which is basically a camera mounted on the rack that reads the speed of the bar, and then there's an iPad tablet that reads out the velocity of the bar. So we're getting an instant readout. How fast did that athlete just pull that weight? And then we'll use that to program, and then the guys use those speeds to compete with each other. So we're basically just taking a very simple explosive movement that's much easier to learn. Everyone can do it, and we've made it effective and competitive.
Nice. Yeah, I may have to steal that one. That was there's a strength coach here in Michigan, Clarkston football. It's a one of those more powerhouse high school football programs, and a guy who's running the strength program wasn't doing a lot of Olympic lifts or variations of it or power cleans. And I asked him the same thing because I was volunteering this last year and helping him out, and just curious. And he said the same thing. Like, I have 40 to 50 kids. Some of them, I'm teaching them how to do like a bench press or a bicep curl. He's like, it's just the scale is so wide that he just said, like, let's get really good at these core ones. But one thing you were talking about, I want to make sure we touch on the dynamic effort. Can you talk a little more about what that means for maybe those who don't know? Just what certain, do you have any accessories you use with that, and just kind of walk through what that uh,
Yeah, so
overview is?
dynamic effort is basically speed work. It's just kind of, similar to the purpose of power cleans and the trap bar jump shrug, cultivating that explosive power. With a dynamic effort squat, for example, we're taking a relatively a lighter weight, typically somewhere between 50 to 65% of max on the bar. We use chains in our program. Most people use bands or chains. The reason being, when you're lifting, as you get closer to the top of the movement, the lift becomes significantly easier. Your body's going to have a tendency to slow itself down as you get to the top. Well, when you put chain weight on there or band weight, the weight gets heavier at the top of the movement,
Mhm.
which forces you to accelerate through the full range of motion. Um, so dynamic effort training, like I said, the two movements we apply it to in our program are the bench press and the squat. We're generally doing sets of two. We've got chains on there. We've got the perch system reading out the bar speed, and we have a goal speed, a minimum goal speed that we're trying to hit. That's one way we'll program it, or we'll have a set weight, and then we'll say how fast can you move the set weight.
Did you have
Um,
like time intervals in there as far as in between each set?
yeah, so
Was that
we'll take shorter rest periods between our dynamic effort
yeah,
work. It's typically going to be you know minute to 90 seconds between
yeah.
between sets. Just working on their ability to maintain that explosive power set to set to set.
Are you seeing? Yeah, I mean, I'd imagine it's different between in season and is it 5 sets of two, 10 sets of two? Is there any kind of general sweet spot you try to get them in?
Yeah,
Or
so 5 sets of 2. That's
okay,
been kind of a rep scheme that we've loved,
okay,
and a common one out there. Now, if you look at West Side Barbell, you'll see a larger number of sets. You'll see some programs out there doing like the 10 sets of 2 or
yep,
10 sets of 1. But for what we're doing, the time we have, and all the other things that we have to touch on, we'll go a little bit lower volume with it.
makes sense. Yeah, I was going to ask you too. Just one of the things, and correct me if I'm wrong. Again, this is your world, much more than mine. But you talked in Strongman about like anterior load. A lot of my understanding, at least, um, back when I used to do more strength conditioning in football, and so this may have changed, but was like a lot of posterior chain work. Is that kind of still a lot of the focus is like that lower back, glute, hamstring development? Can you kind of walk through maybe A, how important is that for an athlete, and B, just kind of maybe some of the movements you do there, even if there's a competitor listening that wants bigger glutes and hamstrings? What are some of your favorite movements or techniques to develop that area from performance wise and size and strength?
Yep, huge focus on posterior chain development. There's an old saying that the anterior muscles are for show, the posterior muscles are for go. It's the speed and power that's going to come from your posterior chain, the glutes, hamstrings, lower back. Um, so one movement that we are a huge fan of, and that I've personally become a fan of, are Nordic leg curls. Are you
Okay.
familiar with Nordics?
It sounds really familiar.
It's one you could probably pull up on the Google image search. Nordic leg curl. It's basically, if you can picture a glute ham raise, it's like doing a glute ham raise with no fulcrum against your knee. You're just flat on the floor and you've got your feet secured and you're
Okay.
lowering your upper body down at the knee. It puts a tremendous amount of stress on the hamstring. Um, that's one movement that we love, especially for our skill guys who, putting a big emphasis on speed development, but then also just hamstring durability. Um, and then we'll do, RDLs.
And kind of something
Uh,
like this, maybe, or
yep.
whoop. Uh, there we go. Kind of, I don't know, but okay.
If
Yeah.
anyone out there ever wants to a very humbling challenge,
Yeah.
developing the strength to do a single rep of a unassisted Nordic hamstring curl is a true test of strength and hamstring durability. Yeah, so that's a movement that we like for our guys, and then just a lot of the traditional movements, RDLs, deadlift variations, back squatting, reverse hypers, glute
Yeah. Reverse
bridges.
hypers. Reverse hypers is a big one for me for my lower back. That was like
Yeah,
a game changer, and I wish the gym I was at had it. So I tried to come up with variations.
yeah, but like you said, we place a tremendous amount of value on posterior chain development for our guys. A lot of the injuries we see in football are hamstring.
Right.
So from a durability and injury prevention standpoint, posterior chain focus is very important. But then also just like we said, speed and power that's going to
Right.
come from posterior chain. So
And is
again,
that
that's
something is that something, I guess what would you attribute the injuries, the hamstring injuries to more from a exercise science or kinesiology standpoint? Like, is it certain imbalances or,
yeah. I mean, sometimes it's an overworked hamstring, sometimes it's a weak hamstring,
got it.
and then sometimes it also comes down to poor sprinting mechanics.
Mm,
Um, you know, it- the weight room work, that's only half the work we do with our guys. In the off season, the field work is, I mean, honestly, probably more important for these guys than the weight room work is itself. So the speed development, the change of direction and agility work, the conditioning, we put a big focus on teaching proper sprint mechanics, and that is going to go a long way in preventing some of those hamstring injuries.
got it. Well, good stuff. Well, I wanted to, I know we're coming up a little bit on time here, but I wanted to wind down with some kind of more rapid fire questions. Some might be single word, some might be a scale of 1 to 10. Some we'll let you elaborate a little bit on, but we'll call this the shoot, move, and communicate section. So it's going to be quick, fast acting coming at you. So the first one will give you a little bit of a layup. You can elaborate a little more than the one word or scale here, but we talk a lot about find your battle, or what is your battle, like being where we say at First Detachment we're battle tested, as far as our products go into nutritional support. And so I'd love to hear just kind of a little bit about when we talk about, or when you hear find your battle, like what is your battle? What's the thing you kind of look forward to, like, attacking each day?
Developing freaks. If I had to put it in the simplest way possible, that's
Nice.
always been for myself, for the guys I work with. I want to work with the freaks. I want to build the biggest, strongest, fastest humans possible. That is absolutely my obsession in life.
Awesome. Good stuff. All right, next one is a one-worder. So now we're going to challenge you a little bit. What would you say to an athlete that's facing adversity?
One word. Damn. This is a tough one.
Maybe 2 words.
Uh,
We'll throw you a bone.
can I get a little context here of what type of adversity we're facing?
Let's say during a strenuous or difficult workout.
Brotherhood maybe, because
Okay.
a lot of this football, it's we say it's about the guy next to you.
Yeah.
When these guys are going through the hard conditioning, it's like, look at the guy next to you, right? It's a team sport. Everyone is in this to win. And if you're quitting, you're letting your teammate down. So if you
Yeah.
can't do it for yourself, then make it about your teammate.
No, I think it's great because it's transferable with family and business and sport, being around those people you care about and love and can lean on. And then when you have nothing left in the tank, you just look over and you're like, all right, I got this.
Yeah.
So I appreciate
Maybe accountability would be another better single word there. Like
no,
being accountable to your teammates.
they both fit. Perfect. All right, just transition a little more broader. What would you say to a high school athlete trying to get noticed by a major college football program out there?
Is this a one worder? I've got one.
Nope. Oh, sure. Go ahead.
If it was a one word, I'd say produce. I mean,
Produce.
it's all about what you put on film.
Yeah.
A lot of these guys, they think they can kind of finesse the system by going to all the camps and doing all this, all the highlight videos on YouTube. It's like, produce, put it on film. And if you are a college level football player, that is going to be reflected in your production at the high school level. If you are not producing at the high school level, I assure you, you are not going to produce at the college level. It
Yep.
is a production business. So you can go all the camps you want. What ultimately matters is what are you doing under the Friday night lights, right?
Got it.
So
Good deal. All right, a little shorter answer now. Just that was a good one. So produce was the word there, but most important meal of the day, if you had to pick one.
pre-workout meal.
Got it. Scale of 1 to 10. How important is sleep?
8,
Scale 1 to 10. How important is nutrition?
10.
Scale 1 to 10. How important is training?
Torn between 8 and 10 because my argument here would be with out of training, nutrition, and sleep, the nutrition arguably might reign supreme out of the three. I'll give training 10. I'll put it on par with nutrition.
All right, good deal. All right, in one word, can you describe strongman?
I think this might be we'll put a hyphen in it, grown man.
All right, I like it. Grown man.
Grown man strong. There's, you see, in powerlifting, you can get away with being a great, having great leverage and technique in a sumo deadlift. When you have to lift those heavy, awkward implements, you better be a grown man in strongman.
I do have to say, I got my butt kicked at my strongman meet, but my at the time girlfriend, now wife, had this awesome picture of my hands are all bloody and there's tape on them and everything. So I ripped them open in the previous
Oh
event and
yeah,
I'm setting a stone up and I'm like, yeah, it was just like, I
that's
was like, no one
strongman
has to
for
know
you.
that I got my butt kicked at, but I got that picture, I'm like, that's right.
Yeah, no singlets in strongman.
Nope. Good deal. All right. And then kind of lastly, just, and if you need to elaborate after, feel free, but, just one word to describe your profession as a strength coach.
Selfless. I think as a strength and conditioning coach in football, it's got to be about the team and it's got to be about the guys. Um, you know, if you're trying to make it about you as a strength and conditioning coach in football, you're trying to just climb your own ladder, get the next job, chase the money. Uh, Things tend not to work out. But when you are really working to serve the athletes,
Yep.
everyone in the building sees that, and the whole team is going to benefit from it. The coaches are going to notice that, and you're one small part in one big system. There's a lot of important people in that building. So just having the humility to know you are not the most important person in that building. This is primarily about the athletes you are coaching. When you take it a little bit more into the perspective of you're in service to the guys, you're trying to help them reach their full athletic potential, which is going to allow the team to win.
Yeah.
I think that's when you're really going to have success.
Well, that's awesome. Well, I appreciate you joining us and coming on today, Jon. Tons of wisdom. So really excited for the audience to check this out. As we wrap up, just that friendly reminder, guys, leave your comments in the comment section, subscribe, click the notification, all that fun stuff. Tell us what you'd like to hear more of. What you'll be seeing parts of this come out in different shorter segments, and then as well as the full video, and we'll kind of slice it up, and we'll look to do some more collaboration with Jon in the future. We definitely want to follow him as he pursues his Strongman Pro card and kind of walk alongside him. That's kind of what we're all about here at First Detachment, just helping people find and conquer their battle. So appreciate again your time. Thanks so much for tuning in, guys. We'll see you.